Welcome back. Here we are again. Who were the wise men? I remember being a child, and there were not three wise men, there were the wise men. And suddenly I started hearing about three wise men, maybe in the 80s. Before that, I didn't. So I first think, oh, there are only three? I went to Matthew chapter 2, and there were no names of the wise men, nor was there a number. The only thing they had was that they were from the East. And so that kind of raised my curiosity. And as I started studying China, I learned a lot about these sages, these wise men. And people think about them back then. It was like in the days of Fushi when they were eating raw hides and chewing on whatever. But by this time, life had become quite civilized. About the time of 600 to 500 BC, yeah, the Babylonians had come in. They conquered Israel, but they also brought the Israelis brought with them their knowledge, and there were people in Babylon that were very interested in stars and the universe and all those things that were going on. There were also people all over that area, and these people, I call them the sages. They were the wise men. Some that I've mentioned before, such as Fuxi and Lao Tzu and Confucius and so on. People think of them as never going anywhere. But that's something I learned about when I was in China. Those men would get together, depending on what age. We're talking, 4,000 years now. But they would go and travel many miles, and then they would stay for maybe a year or two, and they would talk, and they would pass their knowledge and share their knowledge and so on. And by the time Christ was born, China was a very civilized country, and they would have had a group of very wise sages who would spend their time studying the stars and studying the universe. They knew a lot about the history and what was coming forward. For instance, not so long ago in 2020, July of 2020, we had an alignment of the planets, and they had predicted that centuries ago. But they also had predictions for when a king would be born. And of course, one would travel to another, and then they might travel around, and they would spread that knowledge. So a lot of people were aware of that. And I learned one little interesting thing. As they would look at the stars, they would notice that some stars didn't twinkle. And these stars seemed to have a pattern. Eventually, they understood that those were planets, and they were close, and the stars that farther away were what twinkled. And they twinkle because they're so far away. Sometimes another planet would fall in front of them, and whatever else is out there, dust, space dust and stuff, and would cause that twinkle. So they weren't primitive people at all. They were very well educated, and they understood these things. The time came when they saw something in the sky that had happened before, but not when they were alive, and it was important to them. There may be several different things, but the one that generally comes up the most often was a time when I've got to make sure I get these right, so I'm sorry to have to take a minute. Yes, Jupiter and Saturn, the two brightest planets, came together and began a dance in the heavens. So we had them, and then they were doing it in a particular constellation. The constellation was associated with the Jews and Palestine and Syria and that area. So here they are, these planets that are extremely bright, especially when they're together. And we saw that, but we didn't see them together when the conjunction happened, and they were in a line, and you could really see them clearly. But now they were together, like got a spotlight and a spotlight, and they happened to come to the same place. And then that place just happened to be the constellation of Pisces. And Pisces is the one for the Jewish people and so on, and the West and Palestine. So this happened 3 times to the naked eye. And this was before Christ would have been born. That was a sign to them. And they saw where that conjunction happened, and it was in the east. They knew it was a sign of a king to be born. And of course, they wanted to see the king who would be important enough to have his own star sign. Well, a lot of people in China area think that some of those sages came from China. And as I look at it, it makes perfect sense. People think, oh, they traveled by themselves, but likely there was a group of them that decided to go together. They would have had to load up a lot of camels and a lot of food and so on. They would have needed these. It was a 4-month journey to get to Jerusalem. And so they didn't just go, these 3 guys walking along together for a long way. No, it was a lot of people, maybe 5, maybe up to 10 or 12 or more walking together. And they probably had servants, they had camels, they had all of these things that they needed to get together. But here's something I didn't know, and this was interesting. Whatever that celestial phenomena was that appeared in the sky shone brightly. And it shone so brightly that the wise men, the sages, could travel in at night in the dark and see where they were going. Now, back then it was very dangerous to travel in the dark. And so being able to travel all night and then sleep during the day gave them safe passage to Jerusalem. Now, as I imagine it, they probably didn't all come from China. These people knew themselves. They traveled. They spent time with each other. And so I can imagine that as they walked along, they would get other people to join them. So it could have been a pretty big entourage. Big enough that maybe nobody will ever know. Besides the wise men, which if you read a lot of the ancient history, it says there were at least 12. It doesn't say there were 12. It says there were at least 12, plus all their, each one probably had 1 or 2 or 3 servants and a couple of camels loaded down with stuff. It was a pretty big group that would have gone to Israel. So to me, that was very interesting, very, very interesting. But we can go on with it. One thing is, and there's a lot of different names and things, but a lot of people think that Christ was born right 0, the meridian of time. But if you do a lot of research into Roman history and so on, it was probably at least 4 years before that big 0 that we say Christ was born at. And we also are quite sure that it happened in April, because April is the time when new lambs are born. So we've got them probably traveling from what, about December or January till April to get there. And we all know the rest of that story. But one thing I thought was interesting were the gifts. Melissa, do you remember what the gifts were?
They're gold, frankincense, and myrrh.
And myrrh. Yeah, I've been to Israel. And there is a place where they think that Christ might have been buried. There's at least 4 or 5, I think. But one of the more popular ones, they had gold, frankincense, and myrrh, so we could see them, we could smell and touch them. It was really interesting. So there was a reason for gold. He was to be a king, and a king whose kingdom would never end. To bring gold to a child was to declare his royalty. Then they added frankincense, because he was God being worshipped and manifested to those who sought him. Frankincense was burned exclusively in the temple of Jerusalem as an offering to God. I would found this interesting. If you used it in an unauthorized way, at least in some period of time, you were punished by death. So it
Oh,
was a
wow.
very rare and precious thing. Yeah.
So
Incense was,
they weren't messing around when they
they weren't
were
messing
bringing
around. No, you
frankincense.
didn't play with it.
It's dangerous.
Right. But in their beliefs, frankincense was a prayer made physical because it rose to heaven as a prayer should. And it was a symbol of divine worship. So bringing incense to Jesus was a declaration to declare him God incarnate. Then myrrh was used in burial commonly because it was he who should die and be buried for all the mortal race to be saved. And Jesus on the cross was offered wine mingled with myrrh to help dull the pain, and I don't think he accepted it. I'm not sure. I know he turned down the vinegar. But those were the gifts that they brought. And then it was time to leave. Now, of course, we all know the story, at least I hope so. Oh, here's another little thing. When they arrived, they worshiped him by falling completely prostrate on the ground, faces down. The Greek word for that is pronician. And the only people that were given those full fall to the ground, face down, were high-ranking sages, advisors to kings, and kings. So they gave him the full kingly, I don't know what you call it, greeting. Yeah. Then another miracle happened. This particular celestial phenomena, which we think might have been Jupiter and Saturn, but it could have been something else, continued for another 4 months. Now, 4 months, you might remember, was how long it took to walk to Jerusalem, and it would take 4 months to walk back. So the wise men were able to walk from Jerusalem clear back to China at night where it was safest, carrying their goods and so on. I thought that was very interesting. You're talking about love messages from God. They certainly got a message and a protection as they walked both ways. I imagine, now this is only me, there's nothing in scripture that tells us much. They may have dropped off groups of sages along the way and said, gosh, this is nice talking to you for the past 8 months. We've really shared a lot together and so on. But it's very possible, and it's good for us to look at that. So traveling to Israel from China and then return would have taken about 4 months each way. The celestial light in the sky allowed the sages to travel by night by the light of that celestial phenomena that had appeared, seemed to be just above the lowly home where the little family now lived, and then returned safely back to China. And who knows where else? Could have been Persia has some stories also, and other countries. And that's why I think they really did do that, because the stories are there. And then quite soon afterwards, Joseph and Mary would have traveled to Egypt. And that phenomena would still be lighting their world at night and helping Joseph and Mary travel safely to Egypt. And I think they probably would have, Egypt's much closer than China, they probably would have arrived in plenty of time to have that blessing follow them through. Kind of interesting, isn't it?
Well, and the little bit I have that we'll end up
Uh-huh.
editing out for one particular type of video. Um, so my friend Seth from Rise Zion, he speculated that
Yeah.
perhaps the star was actually the city of Enoch or something like that, that would
Mm-hmm.
be able to stay there to be seen to move,
Mm-hmm.
to be as a guide and
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And I was like, I've never thought about that before. It's possible. So
Possible. Well, it was celestial phenomena, one one way or the other.
yeah, a light in the sky. a very
Right.
bright light in the sky. So
And something that most of us don't understand, even the lining up of planets. Um, Very few people, I think, I really recognize it because of my study in China. I'm going, oh my goodness, this is amazing. Other friends are saying, well, they lined up.
well, and if you think about the other things that we discussed in some previous videos together,
Mhm.
mentioning about symbolism with stars in the Chinese
Yes.
culture. And so it would make a lot of sense that a star is what they would follow, and they would bless
Mhm.
trust and believe that that would happen because it is part of their culture. It is part of their belief
Right.
system.
Mhm. It's part of their knowledge. They knew how to distinguish stars from planets and which ones to watch for, when and where. A lot of it came also from in 500 BC. That's when Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and all of those were taken to Babylon. And especially um, Daniel was so honored because of his great knowledge that comes through in their history too. And they shared about the stars and the celestial phenomena and what the meaning was. And of course, all of those sages along the ways probably shared all that information and knowledge too. So what it was exactly, maybe we don't know, but the ancients really knew the stars, just like the Samoans and some of them. We don't we don't have um, we're pretty not too knowledgeable about it in the modern age. It's interesting.
Well, and I think too what you mentioned about the wise men coming and that they would have
Hmm.
likely like an entourage. We think
Yeah,
about, education is pretty easy for us to come by these days comparatively, but in other cultures, it was definitely part of a status symbol that not everyone received an education. And so
right.
I think it's interesting when you understand things about like the Jewish culture and different things. Like, not everyone is given the opportunity to be educated. And so it would make a lot of
Hmm.
sense that it would be a person of status. And I was thinking about how they called them we
Hmm.
three kings of Orient
Yeah, we
are
three kings, and they weren't really kings,
they would
but they were
perhaps look like a
sages.
king to somebody who didn't understand
Oh
because
yeah.
according to your cultural,
Hmm.
traditions, and you see, and it would make sense then that you likely, if they're saying that there was a lot of people, it would make sense that there would be a lot of people because they would think, well, of course they're not doing anything for themselves, they've got everybody here to take care of them,
Care
all
of
of
them.
their
Yeah.
wants and needs, you know
Yeah. That's the way it would have been. It was so interesting. I wish we could just open a little window and watch things. But I imagine we'll get that opportunity someday.
yeah. Yep, that's what I'm hoping, that with God it will be like turning the channel on the TV to get to see what happened
Yeah.
during certain times. Let's see, did you have
Mhm.
anything else to share on this topic, or is there more that
Just to remember that this is my view of it from my study of China and China's history. It may have been a little bit different. It may have been a lot different. We don't really know, but we do know that it fits the narrative where you talk about how much time and the light was available. What was the light? Probably Saturn and Jupiter, but not necessarily so. It fits a narrative that says that this might be the answer.
Well, and also, of course, in the comments, we love anything that you have to contribute. I know there's a lot of people that have looked into other cultures, and there's been other
Mhm.
symbolisms for the wise men and for Christ's birth. And so, please feel free to drop those notes into the comments, and we'll be happy to read them and to respond to any questions that you have. And any ideas, or of course questions about Chinese culture that Aunt Deb has possibly got gained some
That'd be
understanding
fun.
of. So, and also letting us know where you're from. It's very fun to find out where we're based from. Aunt Deb and I are both from Idaho. She's currently in Utah right now. But what
Mhm.
countries have you been to? If you want to briefly mention your missions that you've served, what countries you've been to, that
Yeah.
would be of interest, I think.
And maybe traditions in the
Mhm.
different countries they were the Christmas traditions.
Yeah. And anyway,
Mm.
so thank you so much, Aunt Deb. I'm not sure what
Mhm.
next video we're going to be recording together, but I know that you've got a lot of
But we'll find
experiences to
something.
draw from. So, and if anybody has any questions and there's anything, any suggestions that you have or something with, that she's mentioned
Mhm.
maybe that you would like to know about.
That
Vanuatu,
would be fun.
that's not an island I even knew existed until Deb
I
was
didn't
there.
either.
I was like, she's
We
so
had to look
into
it up on the map. Where are they
what?
sending us to?
But she said,
Oh,
"Oh,
the
it's
most
a."
beautiful place in the world.
Yeah, she's like, "We're eating off of leaves today." So, thanks again, and yeah, we'll see where we're headed to, traveling with Aunt Deb next, and we'll see how long she's here. They have sold their home, and they just travel for missions, and I just generally go from one mission to the next. Anyways, well, thank you again so much, Aunt Deb. It's been so
Mhm.
much fun. And
And
we
thank
just
you.
wish everybody a
Thank you.
Merry Christmas for this holiday season. We're grateful for these opportunities to come closer to Christ and to come and
Mhm.
understand his birth and those who came to follow him and gathered
Mhm.
for the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords.